Tonight, before talking about psychology, which is this evening's talk, I want to just give an overview, a clearer overview of what I mean by a curriculum for the culture of life and what's all entailed. This is the chart, and the way that it's laid out is that there are three things over here: the theology, philosophy, and psychology. Those are really the foundational things, because in theology we're saying, really, what kind of a world and universe do we live in? Because it's about God, but God, what we think about God tells what we think about how anything fits together. In philosophy we're talking about whether the search for truth is possible, and in psychology we sometimes call it Christian anthropology. We're talking about the nature of the human person. And those are the fundamental background of how we choose our curriculum. And really, the choice of curriculum, the curriculum connoisseurs of our time are the homeschool moms. That's who looks the most at curriculum, that's who thinks about it the most, that's who has the strongest opinions, and that's who's the most knowledgeable. Throughout history, the church, but also the mothers. My mother told me that St. Jerome was the first one to suggest making alphabet blocks with raised letters so that Paula, who was trying to teach her son to read, could use them to teach him. So it goes that far back that the church has thought about education, but there's a mother right there. And so then here, it's not exactly in the middle, it's a little bit over, but literature or language. The point is, if you can write and if you can read, then you have access to everything else that other people have to teach. And if you can't, you don't. It's really just that simple. And sometimes people will say, oh, whatever they read, it doesn't really matter as long as they can read. No, reading is not a skill that whatever. Reading is there as an entry into culture. And we really have to keep that in mind and really make sure everything the children read. Why should they ever read anything that isn't beautiful? There's something beautiful on every kind of topic. Not everybody wants to read about horses, but somebody might, there's horses, there's shells, there's the sky, there's stories, there's all kinds of things. But find something which is beautiful and good and moves the hearts of your children. Don't even waste time on stuff. First of all, don't waste time on stuff that you really don't like. Because if you don't like it, then even if your children want to grow up later and read it, you don't have joy in it. And some of the stuff that you don't like because it's trash. Even if other people think it's good, I won't say that. There's a few books that I just intensely dislike. So anyway, then after those theology, philosophy, psychology, and literature and language, then I divide the rest of the subjects into 6. The first 2 are math and physics. And really, when we talk about math and physics, what we can say is that math is about pattern and number. And physics is about applying pattern and number to the understanding of the whole world. Wisdom, chapter 11, verse 20, he has made everything by measure and number and weight. And so, and that really is how the scientific revolution began, was looking at Wisdom, chapter 11, verse 20, in the days when everybody thought that wisdom was one of the books of the Bible. But the catechetical importance of physics is that physics is the one field in the modern world where people still think that there's true and false. People still know that you don't put orange juice in your gas tank. Things are true and false. And the experience of talking about true and false is being taken away from our curriculums as much as possible in the secular world. But the one place where it really can't be taken away, at least not completely, is in the natural sciences. And we need to make sure that we are on top of them. So, enough about that. We'll get to them later. Then we can talk about civics and history. And again, in civics, the question that we're asking ourselves is, how should people live together? What's the best way to order a gathering of people? And in history we say, on the ground, this is what people have tried to do. And this is what has worked, and this is what has not worked. So in history and civics, we're talking about the gatherings of people, and of course, an important part of history is individuals. We're talking about goodness. We're talking about community, and we're talking about goodness. And when people approach history as just, any fact about the past is history, no. That is not culturally valuable. I have a daughter who, she homeschooled in high school, but she thought she would sign up for some stuff at the local high school, and she signed up for chemistry, which was stupendous, and for history, which was, you need to study modern history, so that means you read the front page of the paper, so that means we talk about football. And after 3 weeks of talking about football, she said, no, actually, this isn't what I'm going to do, and pulled out. Just because it happened yesterday doesn't make it part of the cultural thing that we're talking about when we're talking about history. I guess I'm preaching to the choir. Anyway.
It's okay. We need to hear
so,
it.
And I'll come back to this. But anyway, then the last two are music and art. And now we're talking about beauty. What is beauty and where does it happen? And the interesting thing about beauty is that we say that there are three transcendentals: goodness, truth, and beauty. The interesting thing about beauty is that it's always tangible. Whenever we talk about beauty, now and then we talk about a beautiful idea, but basically the word beauty, the literal meaning of the word beauty, is the one that actually means I made a beautiful thing, I wrote a beautiful song. It's physical. Goodness is normally something that's invisible, even when we say, Mother Teresa's is good, but the goodness of her is something that isn't visible in the same way. So it's an interesting one of the transcendentals. It's really pretty different from the others. But anyway, that's really the layout. All of the other stuff that we ever talk about taking, we talk about taking geography, because if you don't take geography, you don't understand history. We talk about spelling, because if you don't have an idea about spelling, eventually writing and maybe even reading become impossible. But the central 10 are these 10. So today we're going to talk about psychology. And psychology is a very interesting discipline because it's the latest of the disciplines to actually come into the academic world as a separate discipline. If you go back 500 years, even all of the sciences were called natural philosophy. Really, with the invention of the telescope and the microscope, the natural sciences began to move away from philosophy and become separate one by one. The telescope, you can think of 1609, because that's sort of the date that people give it. But that changed things very radically because it made measurement possible at a level that had never been possible before. But psychology, you see, what is psychology? The word means the study of the soul. And what happened was that the secular people wanted to say that they were studying psychology in a scientific way, meaning according to the laws of the natural sciences. But the natural sciences are the sciences of measure and number and weight. Now, previous to this breaking off of the natural sciences, the normal definition of science was reasoning from evidence to conclusions. Theology is a science. We have evidence of God's work. We have evidence in creation, we have evidence in Scripture, we have evidence in the teachings of the church and the lives of the saints and so forth. You can reason from evidence to conclusions. After natural science was split off, and after a lot of the Western world became very secular, the definition of natural science, which was evidence is restricted to things that you can measure, count, and weigh. And that's a perfectly reasonable definition for the natural sciences. But once that definition was made, then some people said, oh, psychology is really a science. It's really a science. And they didn't mean, let's go back to the old definition. They meant, let's measure. So what can you measure? You can't measure somebody's soul. What you can measure is how many times they blink when you say apple, or apple pie, or mother and apple pie. You can measure, of course now we're very sophisticated, we can actually light up the brain and see which parts of the brain light up when somebody's trying to do math and when they're trying to do history, and we can just do all kinds of stuff and measure it and be very exact. But is that really the soul? See? The thing about the soul is that your soul is within you. Even if you all do math in your parietal lobes, even if you all do meditation in the anterior cingulate gyrus, your soul, your I am myself, is within. We use the word subjective in the older sense of subjective, where subjective means within the subject. If I talk about what's within me, I know it because it's within me. And when you guys listen and talk about soul, you're looking at your own soul and saying, yeah, she is talking about how I experience my interiority. So the irony of this whole thing, just to bring it to a conclusion, is that in 1850 to 1876, and sometime in that area, when William Wundt opened up a clinic to study behavior, the word psychology came into use. It means the study of the soul, and the discipline was invented by somebody who didn't believe in the soul. That's the irony of it. And that is the reason why there has been this long discomfort between Christianity and the science of psychology, because we actually do believe there's a soul. Let me just point out one contradiction. This is a philosophical point, but it's a very important one to be clear about. If psychology is only the study of things that can be measured, counted, and weighed, and if the human person is only a part of the natural world the same way that the birds and the stones are, then it doesn't make any sense, really, for me to say, you should believe this because it is true. You are only going to believe it for the same reason that a rock falls. If you're tied into the physical world just like rocks, then the only reason for believing what I say is because somehow the gravity of whatever makes you, not because it's true. So, in other words, this idea of psychology completely dismisses the concept of truth, the concept of goodness, the concept of beauty, the concept of God, but in a self-contradictory manner, because of course the psychologist, the professional psychologist, is saying, well, you ought to understand, now that I've explained it to you, that you're really just a pile of behaviors. You don't really have a soul. How ridiculous. Why would you ever think that? But do you see that it's contradictory for him even to desire that you believe that what he is saying is true? So people always want you to believe that what they're saying is true. But what's odd is to say, I want you to believe that it's true, that there is no truth. So that's kind of clumsy. But anyway, we, on the other hand, believe that there is a soul. And so we're going to take a few minutes to talk about the powers of the soul. And remember, when we just settle down and say we're talking about our interiority, long history. In the first place, we have the Greeks talking about personality types. In the first place, we have the Egyptians talking about the soul and the shadow and that kind of stuff. I mean, everybody has talked about there being an invisibility, an invisible part to the human person. And then, of course, you have Paul and the whole Christian tradition talking about sin and goodness, which is a way of talking about what is appropriate and not appropriate in our interior life. So that's all kind of the subject of psychology, too, from our perspective. And then Thomas Aquinas has this fascinating discussion of the passions of the soul, more or less a discussion of what we would call emotions. The interesting thing is, it's in the middle of the Summa. Did I talk about this before? I've gone over it in my mind so many times. Normally we say, oh, the Summa, yeah, that's talking about, the whole thing. How interesting that there's a little essay on the passions in the middle. No. Some people are saying, no, the passions is the topic. And then he goes back and talks about creation just by way of saying, God made the whole world with us to have this kind of an interior life. And by the way, Jesus had a body too, and he also had passions. So there's nothing to be ashamed of about having passions. They're part of human life. And why would Thomas Aquinas be giving such centrality? Here's why. You remember that the Dominicans were founded to fight the Albigensians. And the Albigensians were anti-body. And one of the consequences of being anti-body is to be anti-emotion. Because the emotions are a little bit more attached to the body. And you just think, well, if I didn't have this anger riling me up inside, I would be able to stay on top of stuff. And the Albigensians were so anti-body that the Christians were having a hard time thinking things all the way through. And there was a tendency among the Christians, a tendency which is still among us, to say some feelings are good and some are bad. And when you go to confession, you don't have to confess being peaceful, happy, and cheerful, but you do need to confess being angry. And you do need to confess being sad. This is not appropriate. God made you. And Aquinas is saying, no, we have a way of knowing the world, and our knowledge of the world and of the truth about the world causes us to be happy about things that are good and pushing away things that are bad. So we have love and we have hatred. And we have a concern about things that are happening that we perceive as being evil, and we think we can stop them, and so there's an aversion there. Or we have a different feeling about things that are bad and they're in the future, and we don't think we can hold them off. That's a thought. And the feeling that goes with it is fear, and it's completely appropriate for the thought, this is in the future and I can't stop it. When something is in the future and you think, if I really work, I think I can stop it, then you have zeal and you have daring. But when you think you can't, it's different. And when there's something present that's bad, you think, oh. Sometimes you think you can get over it, then you fight it. But sometimes there's something that's present and you're not completely sure whether you can beat it off. And then you have anger. And the purpose of that anger is that it gives you enough energy to throw your whole self into the fight. And that is appropriate. So putting those passions in the context of cognition is what Thomas Aquinas was doing. It's just an exciting adventure. Anyway, so we have our souls. Let's just talk in a more fundamental way about the soul. I didn't mean to say so much about the body yet, but first just say this about the soul. Normally Catholics say that the soul has certain faculties or certain powers. And everybody agrees that the powers are intellect and will, those two. And many people speak of a third faculty, but not everybody. So the third faculty is sometimes called memory, sometimes called imagination, and sometimes called creativity. So let's take them one at a time. First of all, knowledge or intellect. Of course, all the animals know all kinds of things, but they couldn't take care of themselves. But remember that we have a knowledge that's of a whole different order. And that knowledge that we have is the foundation of our free decisions. That's why we call them free decisions. When an animal makes a decision, he makes it on the basis of things that are pretty immediate. No animal makes a decision about how to help his grandchild. It's just not there. None of the animals in America are trying to figure out how to take care of the animals in China. They're lucky if they go beyond their own children to, they have a tribe or a group. So our intellect, which allows us to think about truths and to think about things that are not right here, is a completely new thing. So that's one power of the soul. Then there's the power of decision, of making decisions based on intellect. they're not based on nothing. Free will doesn't mean that it's based on nothing. If it's based on nothing, it's just random. But the point is it's based on the intellect. Now, some people don't list the third thing. I don't think that, as far as I can tell, Thomas Aquinas doesn't, but St. Augustine does, and St. John of the Cross does. And so does Peter Kreeft. So let me just talk about it for a minute. First of all, we think of memory normally as referring to the past, of course. But one of the interesting things about memory is that every time a memory comes up in your mind, you're in a new setting. And so when the memory comes up, it's juxtaposed with the new setting. And then down the road, when that memory comes up again, the way it comes up is, it's this memory, but it comes up as being a memory that was juxtaposed with this event. And now it's coming up inside of this event. So that even if it's the same memory of when you were 5 years old, that memory changes over time because it keeps being compared with other things. And that comparison is an act of the imagination. And it's important to see that because I just want you to understand we're not cameras. Memory is always mixed with imagination. And not only is it mixed with this event coming up in this context, but it comes up in this context, and then somebody like Linda says, well, you could take it that way, and you could do this next time it comes up. So now, it's not only mixed with these events, but it's mixed with a possible plan. And that plan is another whole act of imagination. So, in other words, memory is it's just not a camera. It's not a pure thing. It's always imagination. There's often an element of planning. And if you're Tolkien, or even if you're lots of other people, most of us at a certain moment in our lives, there's a kind of a planning where we're thinking about beauty. We're not just thinking about how to get the next meal or how to open the next book. We're thinking, how shall we arrange these flowers? How shall we put up this curtain? What should I wear? We're thinking about beauty. And beauty is very important because beauty is what lifts up the heart. And lifting up the heart means supporting the theological virtue of hope. So it's not an extra. Anyway, so powers of the soul. And those powers of the soul help us to think clearly about the fact that we have an interior life. Now, the church teaches very specifically that the human person is a substantial unity of body and soul. And I remember you thinking, what does he mean by that? But it's one of these ideas that becomes clearest when you step way outside of Christianity and turn around and look back. The Buddhists don't think the body is real. So they don't think that the body and soul are united because the body isn't there. You just think it is. And that's your deception. And when you outgrow it, you'll stop being reborn into this world of fakery. So that's your whole journey, is to stop thinking that the body is real. That's the Buddhist idea. Of course, the secular idea we've already talked about a little bit. The secular idea is that the soul is not real. It isn't a substantial unity of body and soul because there's no soul. There's just a body with emanations, brainwaves, as if brainwaves were something. The church says that the body and soul have a substantial unity, and there's one other way of being mixed up about that. You can say there's no body, you can say there's no soul, or you can say, the soul and the body are both real, and the soul is in the body the way a truck driver is in a truck. And, the real life of the truck is the truck driver. The real life of, truck and truck driver is the driver. And of course, we do know that when we die, the body is discarded and not there anymore, and we believe that we have eternal life. But we also teach that the soul is incomplete when it's separated from the body. And that's why we need to have a new body. And you know, it's funny when you talk to people, huge number of people, badly catechized Catholics and Protestants, whatever, they don't have as clear a philosophy anyway. But when you start imagining, as many people do, that when you die you become like an angel. You don't have a body anymore, so you just live like an angel. Think about it for a minute. Here we all are talking to each other, or at least I'm talking to you. What does it mean to imagine a heaven where nobody has a body? You think, oh, heaven's going to be great. I'm going to be able to talk to my mom again. What if your mom's talking to her mom? What if her mom's talking to her mom? How will you know? When do you know she's going to be available? Oh, everybody's going to be everywhere all the time. Really? What kind of a conversation is that going to be? You know what I'm saying? It's not really making sense. Part of what body is about is having location. So you've got all eternity. You'll have a chance to visit with your mom, but you need to have a body too. That's just the way we're made. And so we believe that we have this close unity, and one way of thinking about that unity is to think about some of the ways that the body, and things that we think of as being the body, exhibits our interiority. So I'm just going to give you two examples. One is handwriting. I have a second cousin who grew up in China, and she told me that the Chinese have a proverb, your characters reflect your character. I said, really? She said, yes, and it's the same pun in Chinese that it is in English. And so all of the handwriting analysis that we do, which is sort of esoteric, the Chinese been doing the whole time and been saying all along, this thing that you do out here with your hand, your soul is right out there at the end of your fingers, and when you make those marks, it's there. And there's a book by Vimala Rogers, I mean, I'm sure there's dozens of books, this is one I happen to have read, called Your Handwriting Can Change Your Life. And she talks about how somebody's interiority is revealed. And I'll just tell you a story because it's kind of a funny one. She tells about a woman who came to her who, in making her O's and her A's, you know how you can come up to the O sort of and then go across it and then loop around like this and then go off like that, so it sort of has curtains over it? She says, when you have curtains over your O's and A's, it means you're keeping a secret. So this gal came to her who had curtains all over those. Well, it turned out that she had had an affair 25 years before, and she had never told her husband because she said, we really love each other and I just don't want to change anything. And so, you know, Vimala didn't push her to go talk to her husband. She just said, well, take the curtains off and see what happens. So for 3 weeks she practiced making her O's and her A's without curtains. And then she just had a candlelight dinner, told her husband, and he leaned across the table and said, honey, I always knew, and I didn't want to say anything about it because I was afraid it would change the relationship. Oh, wow. So it's just a sweet story. Oh, wow. But actually, I was still going, yeah, well, okay, one story. But then one time, I had done something which I wasn't really very sure I wanted everybody to know, and I was writing a grocery list. And all of a sudden there's curtains all over my A's and O's, and I'm going, oh, okay, whatever. You know, it's right there. It's right there. Okay, so that's one story. Another story is one that I have a cousin who does massage, and a fellow came to her who was in his 20s, and he was sort of immature. He had the same car, first car he ever had when he was 16. He's in his mid-20s. He's still living with his mother. He's never had a girlfriend. And he's beginning to think, you know, maybe there's some growing he needs to do. But besides that, he has scars from a ski accident that he had when he was 11. And she said, here's the story. Your feet and your legs represent going out, going forward in life. And especially your right foot, if you're right-footed, is now I'm going somewhere. Now I'm going to go forward. And he had the ski accident when he was 11. So just at the moment of puberty, the part of his body that meant now I will go forward broke. And so as she worked on the old scars from that break, they also considered his need to be someone who could step forward with his right foot. So they finished the massage, got a new car, moved out of his house, found a girlfriend, moved to another state. So you can also take care, well, and I guess that was implied too in what I said, you can take care of some of your personal change needs by just doing something as simple as changing your handwriting. If you change your handwriting, you may just find that things settle out a little bit. And you'd think you can't do it, but the point is, it is connected. So I'm not going to argue about it. I've experienced enough to know that among the many ways that we can approach change, this is one more. And it's a very interesting one. So, we've talked about the soul and the powers of the soul. And now I want to turn to the one topic that, in considering psychology, is always uppermost in mothers' minds and always a concern, and that's discipline. And the thing that I want to say is, first of all, our children have souls, and they have this incredible dignity of being the children of God. But just think about how you handle your children when you're angry. And ask yourself whether, if you saw that you were handling their souls, whether that would change what you were doing. Now, in Christianity right now, and especially in the homeschooling movement, we have two very strong threads. One of them is spare the rod and spoil the child. So that system is, if you're not beating them, you're not a good mom. And the other is the idea that, Jesus says, let the little children come to me. And he says, be like little children. How could he ask you? He doesn't mean be like somebody who gets beaten every day, right? He means be trustful. And that trustfulness is going to come from trusting parents. So it's very important that you communicate that your children's whole being is precious to you. So when we have those two threads, let me just say one thing about the spare the rod and spoil the child. I never criticize people for spanking. You deal with it. If you're spanking all the time, you have a problem that you need to deal with. Because you do need to keep order in your household, and sometimes things get pretty chaotic and it takes a pretty high intensity move on your part to pull things back together. But if you're always at a high intensity, it's very harmful for your child in several ways. First of all, he doesn't trust you. Secondly, this is kind of an interesting thing. Anytime that people get frightened, it doesn't matter how old you are, at the moment that you become frightened and you produce all this adrenaline, the left side of your brain shuts down. Not the whole left side of your brain, depends on how much adrenaline, but here's why. If a jaguar jumps through the window, this is not a time to debate about what we're going to do. You just need to act. The right side of the brain is the side that is for new stuff and immediate action. And in smells, for example, the right side of the brain is the side that is sensitive to bad smells, like skunks and fire. Skunks mean you need to do something. Fire means you need to do something right now. And the left side of your brain is all the nice smells and all the libraries and all of the logic. Okay? So if a jaguar jumps through the window, you need to act, not debate. But if your mom wants you to change the way she lives in the house, you need to think and understand as well as act promptly. That's what you want from your children, is that they would think. They won't think if their adrenaline is up. We're not made that way. It can't happen. So put it behind you. When you beat your child, it means that all the thought is going to be tomorrow, if ever. They're not going to think now. You think, oh, this will make you think. No, it won't. It won't make them think. So that's just kind of an interesting thing about discipline and about the brain. And then it opens up the question, well, what are you going to do? And we've talked about this before, but when you need to discipline your children, especially when they're fighting with each other, but even when it's just something that they've done, remember that when a child does something wrong, he loses a measure of his dignity. He knows he's done something wrong, and he feels less because of it. So what you want is a discipline, a bringing things back together into order, that will restore his dignity. And that's why sometimes when kids are fighting, if you ask them to memorize a poem together, or if you ask them to wash windows together, or something like that, then they come to the end having worked together, so that builds a bond, and having achieved something, so that rebuilds their dignity. And they've had enough time to quiet down. So try to think through your discipline from the perspective, what will increase the dignity of the child, so that when we come back to the question of household order, his head is working on both sides, and we're ready to go forward. So it's just an interesting reflection on discipline. And remember, mothers and fathers represent God and the universe, and mothers especially represent the Blessed Mother, much more than the Catechism or the Scriptures. That comes later. But the immediate thing is, you are the mom. What is the Blessed Mother like? She's like my mom, only she's a little bit different, but I'm not quite sure how much. So just think about those things. And now I need to talk about one more topic about the soul. Paul has this odd passage where he says that the Holy Spirit is a two-edged sword that cuts to the division between the soul and the spirit, like a knife cutting between the marrow and the bone. Well, if you've looked at the marrow and the bone, there's not too many knives going to run into there. What is Paul saying? Is he saying that besides body and soul, we also have another piece? And the answer is no. But he is saying, and he says over and over again in his letters, that when people are filled with the Spirit, they behave in a completely new way. And the greatest pagan in the world does not have even what the least Spirit-filled person has as a motive for living. It's the movement of the Spirit of God in the human soul changes the human soul, lights up the spirit in a way that nothing else does. So then you think, well, what does that really look like? What could we possibly be talking about? Well, read Paul, because it's interesting. He gives a lot of examples. But let me just give two that I always think of. One is that Saint Therese of Lisieux, at the end of her life, she died of tuberculosis, and it was extremely painful. And I don't remember what biography I read this in. I can't give you chapter and verse, but what the doctor said was he could not believe that she lived that long. He thought she would have been dead a day or two earlier because it was so incredibly painful. And what she said was, I didn't know that it was possible to love so much. And we know, even from the natural science side of psychology, that love is the movement in the human person that best organizes the whole person and keeps everything running more smoothly than anything else. So what we're really looking at in Saint Therese is somebody who was filled with the Spirit and whose love held her body together with her soul for 2 full extra days. So living by the Spirit is a reality. We can't all wait till we have TB to see if we're in it. But the first thing is just to understand, yes, it is a reality, and it is worth reading Paul, and it is worth figuring out what he's saying. The other example, of course, is the crucifixion. I want to talk about the crucifixion. You know, everybody has a different part of the crucifixion that maybe strikes them. What strikes me, since I was much younger and read Doctor on Calvary, which was written quite a long time ago, there are many books since, but is the impossibility of it. It's just, first of all, it is possible, medical science says, for people to be under so much tension and pressure that they actually sweat blood, but it doesn't happen very often. It implies a level of tension that that's probably enough to do you in by itself. The Romans had a law that you could only be lashed 40 times, so it was normally only 39, but Jesus was not a Roman citizen. He was lashed 120 times. And if you look at the scourge, you figure 5 should be enough for the average person, and maybe 39 would be enough for a strong man. But he had 120. And then he was in the prison overnight, and he was hit in the face, and he, fell down while he was trying to get up the hill, and he had this big thing on his back. They finally had to take that off. He couldn't carry it. And then he died of suffocation, because that's how you die in crucifixion. So, okay, when I have the flu, I think, that's a full-time job. Don't expect me to do anything else. Maybe if I have a nursing baby, but otherwise, no. Jesus is dying of suffocation, and first he takes care of his mother. Well, okay, she's been a good friend for a long time, so he takes care of her. Then he takes care of the thief beside him. Everybody's saying, if you're really God, why don't you just step down? That'd make life easy for us all. And the one thief is saying, yeah, how about it? And the other thief is saying, you know what? We deserve this. But he doesn't. And then he makes a direct appeal to Jesus. He says, I want to be in your kingdom. How did he recognize, at that point in his life, he's dying of suffocation too. He didn't get scourged, but he is dying. But he understood who Jesus was well enough to say, I want to be what your fellowship is. So Jesus gives him his attention. And then, that's not enough. At the foot of the cross, there's a man who didn't know Jesus before, who became a Roman soldier probably for the same reason that any boy becomes a soldier, because, you can go out and do great things and be like Aeneas and like Caesar and, be big and important and cut people's heads off and, And he's at the foot of the cross, which is the sort of the pit of jobs. You hanging around lowlifes who are dying and cursing, and it isn't really much fun, and that's what he's doing. And he's not really looking at what he's doing. The only thing that's sort of interesting is that this guy's cloak is, woven in one piece from top to bottom, and most of the lowlifes who get crucified don't have high-class seamstresses in their, friendship circle. So he kind of wants it, and he's gambling, he's all up in his parietal lobes thinking about that. And Jesus, who's dying of suffocation, looks down and says, I'm going to get this guy too. And he says, hey there, I'm thirsty. And I don't want the stuff with narcotics, because I'm on the job right now. I just want the plain wine. So he puts it on the tip of his sword, and he holds it up, and he has to look in the face of Jesus because he's got to find his mouth. So he looks up, and he sees that face. That's what he needs. He needs to see that face. And after Jesus has had a drink, then he's just got something to think about. Because he's got these mirror neurons, that we talked about, working on this. And when Jesus dies, he says, that was a Son of God. And he doesn't mean the Trinity. He doesn't know about the Trinity. Maybe he means Aeneas, whatever he means. But here's what he means. That's what I wanted to be when I became a soldier. And I'm going to find out who this guy is and who his followers are, and I'm going to join them, and I don't care if we all get crucified. That's what I want, because that's what it really means to be a Son of God. And that ministry to a soldier at the end of his life while he's dying of suffocation is what, on top of everything else, is completely impossible. Almost. We can't say it's completely impossible, because that would mean that would be a denial of the incarnation. But by any measure of what we understand is possible for the human person, this isn't in it. But it's a revelation of what it means to be Spirit-filled and to live entirely from love. And that's the highest reach of the human spirit, which is to say, the human soul as opened and facing the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit in love. So that's what I wanted to say about psychology. So, if you have some questions.
I just thought it was interesting that hope, you said beauty is specifically tangible, and beauty instills hope. And I guess I was just thinking about, so in order to have hope, we have to have something that we can interrelate with physically.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, it makes even more sense why Christ would have come.
Would have come and made himself
Right.
tangible. It's interesting because you know, when we say, I used to have a difficult time distinguishing faith from hope, because we say, you know, faith is believing stuff and hope is trusting. So faith is we believe that Jesus has heaven for us, and hope is trusting that he does. So what's the difference between those? And the answer is, faith is believing whatever Jesus said, you know, in the realm of ideas which completely reorganize our whole way of thinking about the world. But hope is what you have. Okay, think about the Lord of the Rings when he says, green fields, white shores, and a swiftly rising sun. It's an image. When you have that image of heaven, it's like, all right, I can do this. And it's in the realm of imagery. And you are called, as a child of hope, to reorganize your whole imaginative life around the images that we have been given of heaven and of Jesus and of things that are beautiful, but also roses and beautiful gardens and sunsets. All of those things which say to us beauty and that make us go, all of those things are God's will for us to strengthen the theological virtue of hope. So, kind of exciting.
So you're talking about love, and Saint Therese saying, you know, that she didn't know, she didn't know that it was possible. You know, it was possible to love that much. And I was thinking today, I was driving a lot, and of course I had Fox News on, and you know, for the whole day they were talking about the Ebola crisis, and I was thinking, so excuse me, because we don't want to go over there to help because the healthcare workers are getting sick in Africa. 56% of them who are actually caring for the sick are actually dying. And I was thinking, we're back in the days of Pier Giorgio Frassati, where he willingly took care of people and died in that epidemic. And I think, I don't know, I was just thinking, so is it possible to love that much? That we'd be willing to love, even doing that, and be willing to lay down our life. And that's a tough question. And it's actually present right now. And I think, this is a time where we need to be, talking with our children about these great acts of heroism that people do. Of course we don't want to do it. But anyway, I was just thinking, that's the supreme act of great love for, Pier Giorgio Frassati to have done what he did, and for these healthcare workers that are in danger to do it, especially if they're doing it because they choose to do it. I don't know, it's just something I'm thinking of today.
That is exactly the important choice, and the healthcare workers who choose to do that, knowing the risks, have some other image in their minds. The image that we're getting on the news is, oh, this is terrifying, it's the death, it's going to be the end, all these people's lives are going to be ruined, everybody's being stupid. All of those images, and it's not that those images don't reflect facts about the situation. It's that you, as a Christian, have a responsibility for the life of your own imagination. The same as you are responsible for your thoughts. You can't let your thoughts keep wandering around things that are hurtful and false. You have to take your imagination and say, okay, but the critical question is, first of all, am I called here? Secondly, even if you're not called to go there, Are you doing what's right in front of you with courage? And are you making sure that you keep in the forefront of your mind that God is calling those people to himself? And he's calling the people of America to himself at all times. And at this moment when people feel their vulnerability, you who understand the meaning of that need to be praying that that vulnerability sense will bear fruit in love and not only in fear.
Right, and I was just thinking today, perhaps the scare will drive us to our knees. And
It will drive some
and
people.
basically we need to go to our knees. And,
But
right, not all, but
not all, and you pray for them.
right. Well, I was thinking too when you said the line, from the Lord of the Rings, so excuse you, the vision of heaven, and so excuse you, toward the end when they're struggling and they're not getting there and their life is really difficult, and Sam says, asked, do you remember the taste of strawberries? And I think we don't want to lose that, because sometimes we get so bogged down in the Ebola news, etc., and the border crisis and all this stuff that we forget the taste of the strawberries in our life, the blessings and the graces that come to us. I was kind of joking before that my son named his pigs after the 12 fruits of the Spirit. It was a good way to remember it, because he really identifies with them. But I was thinking, just to say, that person displays the gift of benignity, there. That this is or this person displays this or displays that. But, if it takes naming the pigs after them, it doesn't matter, because
because you're filling your mind
right
with these
the things that are above.
Yes.
You're not forgetting the taste of the strawberries. But all right, that's it. I'm done.
Remember though, just one thing. Frodo said, I can't remember those things.
Right.
I remember that they were, but no
Right.
taste of them. So for some people, there does come a moment when we need to uphold them in prayer.
Right.
Which is what Sam did. He just stayed
Right,
right
he
there.
stayed
Because Frodo couldn't remember the strawberries, but Sam was there.
To refresh him.
Yeah.
So what's your experience? So be very interesting to find, experiences, that we all have, we all have a different understanding of Jesus' passion and what
Yes.
that means for us. And I was thinking, I'm a divorced person and remarried. And, because I'm a Catholic, I never intended to have that happen in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sometimes very difficult for me to live with that. I'm very ashamed of it in some ways. And then I have to bring to mind that, Mary Magdalene is at the foot of the cross with the Blessed Mother, and the Blessed Mother did not run her out and say, you shouldn't be here. And Jesus didn't say, you really don't belong here. And, the Blessed Mother didn't even think ill of her, because she was basically conceived without sin and cannot have that feeling about any of us. And for me it was a real revelation thinking about that, because I thought, the Blessed Mother does not look down upon me, nor does Jesus, because, basically the picture is very clear. So that's my experience of the Passion. That in Jesus' suffering, he allowed this sinful woman to be there, and he loved her.
That's not even a perspective, except that I've heard it from you.
Yes.
That anybody has ever pointed out to me before. And it is amazing to me how many people there are in the world with completely different, fundamental centers.
And it is interesting to hear what people's perspective is on that. So, where are you during that whole crucifixion? Now, because, I'm identifying, I'm right there with the sinful woman. So it's interesting to hear what other people's perspectives are, because it opens my mind. A little shriveled mind.
Well, at the moment, this is where I am. It's just, this is impossible. So don't say anything you have to do is impossible. Just keep going. It's, and love, it's amazing.
When you were talking about that, I remember reading or hearing a talk about, the crucifixion and, they're talking about the Shroud of Turin,
Yeah.
and how they've gotten so much information from that about the crucifixion, about, what kind of condition Jesus' body was in afterwards and things like that. But one of the doctors was saying, there's just no way that any regular human person could have endured this physically, what Jesus went through, what he took on in his passion.
It was impossible.
And when they put it like that, you just think, because sometimes it's easy to be kind of like, oh, Jesus.
You've heard this story before.
You've heard it so many times, you've grown up with it,
Right.
and you don't stop and put it in perspective and think, yeah, nobody could have survived that. They would have, you know.
And so the next time you get flu, you need to spend your time in ministry.